Hi, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of our podcast, Play, Learn, Lead ECE Voices of NL. I'm Taylor.
And I'm Sonia. And this month we're going to talk about professional practice with our guest, Hillary.
Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here.
So, in regards to professional practice, we really want to focus a lot on um, relationships. So, that's relationships with the children, with the families, with um, community helpers, consultants, and our coworkers.
Mm-hmm.
So, Hillary, what does a professional relationship look like to you?
I think the first word that comes to mind is respectful. I think that
Mm-hmm.
is what is going to lead to any professional relationship being a positive one.
Yeah.
Because if you can work towards having mutual respect and sometimes taking the lead on the one being respectful, even if someone's not being respectful to you, can
Mm-hmm.
change the tide. Because if
Right.
we feel disrespected by someone's actions and then we are disrespectful back, we often have that self-fulfilling prophecy happening because
Mm-hmm.
we never know what's going on in someone else's head. It could be that someone woke up on the wrong side of the bed that morning. It could be that someone's undergoing stress at home, whatever's going on, and it could cause their tone to be uh, not what we're expecting. And if we
Yeah.
respond with disrespect, it just negatively, right from the get-go, creates this environment that you can't, it's hard to claw your way out of that
Mm-hmm.
once it's started. But if you approach a new relationship, like you said, with a child, with a caregiver, with another professional, that, we have so many professionals coming in and out of our
Mhm.
spaces, with a colleague, with management. If you approach it from the beginning to try to be respectful on your end of it, you'll often end up having a respectful relationship, even if you weren't quite feeling respected in the beginning.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. It's a lot. It sounds a lot like mirroring when we talk about that with the children and ECEs. And it makes me think about when you think you mentioned self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes, yeah.
And it makes me think about if I'm coming in with um an attitude of, oh, this is going to be such a hard day, right? Like that's going to flow into the room.
Oh, and
Yeah.
the emotional climate of a early learn of any room, but of an
Mhm.
early learning space, is going to make a huge impact on everyone's day.
Yeah.
Because if you're working alongside someone, and that, like, let's say that the difficult relationship is with your colleague, that's actually going to make everyone's day harder because children pick up on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you're going to have increased challenging behaviors. You're going to have increased energy that maybe isn't coming out in the right way in the children. So then you have two professionals at odds trying to deal with increased uh, things in the room, challenging
Mm-hmm.
behaviors, and then it just ends up like a tumbleweed, just a snowball effect,
Yeah.
getting
Yeah.
harder and harder. And as we all know, our sector, our workforce, is dealing with burnout and compassion fatigue, which are two very separate things. I always like to bring up that fact because some people think that they're the exact same, but you can experience burnout in a job that you are sitting at a desk and not engaging with
Yeah.
people.
Mm-hmm.
But compassion fatigue is specific to working with people, but also it's usually linked to working in compassionate fields. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
we can experience, as ECEs, we can experience both, and it's a layered effect. And if
Mhm.
we're already experiencing that, and then we're walking into our workspace and then we're not getting along with our colleague, for example,
Mm-hmm.
it just gets harder and harder, and everybody's day gets harder.
Yeah.
Whereas if we lean into that, working on trying to have mutual respect, even if we don't agree on, because you can disagree with how you can disagree with details when it comes to what your colleague is comfortable with in terms of interacting with children. An
Right.
example I would use is like different people, different ECEs have different perspectives on risky play, for example.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's not that one ECE is letting children come to harm and the other isn't. It's just that both ECEs have different levels of comfort with risky play.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And you can respectfully disagree about that and come to a compromise with how you run your room rather than just being at odds because, oh, this one does it this way and this one does it that way.
Yeah.
Well, like
No, absolutely.
I know for myself, like there's some things that I know I can't handle, but I also know that there's nothing wrong with it. So I'm like, if there's this like my coworker that is fine with it. I'm like, can you please go supervise that? Because I'll be nervous, then they'll get nervous because I'm nervous.
Yeah.
But
And
they're
it's more
fine.
likely that that a child will get hurt if you're not
Mm-hmm.
comfortable with what the play is. It's better for the play to, it's better for you to work with your colleague to uh, ensure that both of you are at a comfort level. Like you said,
Yeah.
having that conversation saying, I'm not comfortable with this play, but you are. So can you step
Yeah.
in? Um, and another thing there is making sure to knowing, like we talk about knowing children's temperaments and
Mm-hmm.
knowing the children in our space, but it's also really important to know the other professionals in our space as well.
Yeah.
Because if
Mm-hmm.
I know I worked with someone who was less comfortable with risky play than I was, and something I had to be mindful of is I there was a group of children, preschoolers, that really like to wrestle, and I was okay with it. We made it safe. I had full conversations with the children about, okay, it has to be on the grass, it can't be on the pea gravel, and I was drawing their attention to what are the risks here, and they were like, that's that tree stump, that rock, and I was like, yeah, these are all not safe things. Where can we go to wrestle to make it safe?
Mm-hmm.
So we did all that hazard mitigation, because there's a difference between hazard and risk. But I also made sure that if I was the staff that was off at 4:30, where I worked, had a lot of our
Mm-hmm.
early learning environments have staggered shifts. If I was off at 4:30, I didn't walk away from the wrestling and go, see you later, have fun.
Right.
I let the children know, okay, we're going to clue up the wrestling now and find something, and I would help support that a few minutes before I was leaving, so that
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't having it so that my colleague was dealing with this after I walked away. So being aware of that and how your actions can impact your colleague in a negative way is also important to be mindful of as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And sometimes having those conversations with our colleagues is really tricky because we only see each other when we're together with the children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So another thing that we really need to consider is the language that we're using, the tone that we're using,
Yeah.
and just like you said, being respectful, because we don't want the children to hear something that will make them get bias against the
Yeah.
other staff.
Yeah.
All those relationships can be affected. It's not just the two staff who are talking. It could be the children or
Mm-hmm.
parents.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah. And recognizing a colleague's strengths is professional care, because you can
Yeah.
do that sharing so that if you know Taylor mentioned that there's certain risky play that she's just not comfortable with, and in that case it could cause her to have increased compassion fatigue if she's very stressed about children
Mm-hmm.
being in harm's way because
Yeah.
it's something that she's not comfortable with. So if I was working alongside Taylor, I would be supporting her day, her ability to stay professional, her relationship with the children, because
Hmm.
you're ensuring that, like you said, you don't want there to be that bias. I wouldn't look at children and say, okay, I'm going and Taylor doesn't let you wrestle, so you have to stop. I would say, okay, this play, we're going to move on to something else. And it would just be a very neutral transition. So
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
exactly what you said about ensuring that the language that we're using is calm, kind, respectful. And something else that I think is a little bit of a, I don't think everyone would agree with me on this, but what it, when you mention the fact that often when the times that we see our colleagues just at work,
Hmm.
I think that there is a place for two professionals around the children to have a conversation about themselves in front of the children.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be about child appropriate topics. It can't be
Yeah.
about what I did Friday night when I went out and did things that are happening after midnight.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be, it could just be about if I have a pet, if I have a child, I have a 10-month-old Benjamin, I'm not working as a frontline ECE right now, but I would definitely come in and talk about Benjamin to my colleague in front of the children
Mm-hmm.
as
Hmm.
a way to foster my relationship with my colleague, but also modeling having positive conversations to the
Yeah.
children.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because I think that sometimes, because inappropriate conversations are happening around the children, it can be stamped down, you know, don't talk about non-work related things. But I think there's a healthy balance of having those kinds of conversations to ensure having a positive relationship with your colleague and modeling those positive relationships around the children.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also think about going back a little bit when you mentioned recognizing each other's strengths,
Yeah.
how important it is to not just do that internally, but to also like
Oh,
show appreciation to each other.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And in doing that, we minimize the stress on ourselves
Yeah.
because
Absolutely.
there's a better atmosphere. And if appreciation is modeled, the children are going to learn it.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. And if you see something that I love to do is if I saw a colleague having an amazing interaction with a child, I would let the child's caregiver know. The caregiver would come to pick up their child and I would say, "Oh my gosh, you won't believe what Sonia was doing with your child today because your child was doing XYZ. Sonia stepped in and I would just let the caregiver know. And whether the my colleague was in earshot or not, but even better if they are because they're hearing that
Mm-hmm.
I'm giving this positive affirmation. But I think that a really big piece of um, team building and also advocacy for our sector is telling positive anecdotes about what we're seeing in our spaces of what our colleagues are doing. It's, you know, we need to lift each other up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when talking about positive anecdotes as well, just thinking about that relationship with the parents or the caregivers and how to build the trust and bringing the positives in,
Yes.
making
Yeah.
sure we're not just talking about the negatives.
Yeah.
And I go back to the start when you were talking about how our attitude affects the children and then behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And so once those behaviors start, then we risk losing a bit of that connection with the families because they're hearing, like, even if we use the sandwich effect, they're hearing more and more
More
negative than they
negatives.
used to.
Yeah.
There's just so much involved in having an unprofessional attitude.
Yeah, and I think so. Two things. One, just to for anyone that doesn't know the sandwich effect, it's the saying the positive thing, and then you have the negative kernel in between, and then having the positive at the end. But I think a big piece is that we need to connect before we correct.
Yeah.
So if
Mm-hmm.
you build relationships with families from the get go, and listen, I know how busy it is as an ECE because I was a frontline ECE for years myself. And I know that when you're juggling 16 preschoolers in a room and parents are coming and picking them up, and you don't have time that every single day you're giving a positive anecdote to every single parent. It's just not possible.
Hmm.
But
Mhm.
if you make it your go-to that when you can, you're giving those positive anecdotes,
Yeah.
it makes it so that your relationship with the parent, with the caregiver is built up enough that when something does come up, you can address it respectfully, and the caregiver, parent, family member is also more open to hearing what you have to say because they know that you see their child in a positive light.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's really hard if you, as a parent, or a caregiver, family member, it's very difficult if the first time you're really having regular conversations with an ECE is because your child is doing something that's causing a disruption to the day, because then you can kind of feel that your child is being singled out. Like, you can have all
Yeah.
kinds of thoughts as a parent to justify what's going on. And sometimes it's about um, you know taking the time to observe the child over a week, 2 weeks, doing your ABC reports, your antecedent behavior, and now I can't remember what the C is, but the conclude. I'm going to use the word conclusion, but where you it,
Consequence.
consequence. Thank you. The Even if you don't have a chance, like, I know how busy the day is, and you might not have a chance every single time to actually have pen and paper and be writing down your ABCs. But if you're at least being mindful of it, so that when you do go to the parent, you have professional information about child development to share with them. So it's not just coming from, I'm noticing this negative behavior, and then sort of like, what are you going to do about it, parent or caregiver or family
Yeah.
member? And often, something I would do is I would start asking parents and caregivers what they're seeing at home. So sometimes the lead in would be, if you already have that relationship built with the caregiver, you can have a conversation about what they're seeing at home, because if they share it first, then you only have to say, we're seeing the same thing here.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit of a softer open than,
Mhm.
we're seeing this behavior. I'm not saying that will work every time, because sometimes their families can be a little reserved about sharing that
Mhm.
information. But if you have the relationship built with the family, I've been in the experience where families will share that, and then you can
Yeah.
go from there.
Yeah. I find that you do get a much better response when you have invested in the relationship.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Um, I want to kind of talk about teamwork and collaboration,
Yep.
not just with our colleagues in our centers, but with consultants and other professionals like speech language pathologists, occupational therapists, physiotherapists, just anyone who we could be working with.
Yep.
Um, how would you suggest that we help build those relationships? We
I
only see
think,
them every now and
yeah,
then.
I think a big thing to keep in mind is that collaboration outside of the center strengthens the whole sector.
Hmm.
Yep.
So that's something to keep at the
Yeah.
forefront of your mind. Another piece to consider is that we're still at a point, I'm saying we as the collective ECE voice, we're still at a point where so many people do not know what we do all day. I've been the inclusion staff, which I hate that. I don't like that that's what it's called. I think
Yeah.
it needs a more professional name. But I've been the inclusion staff a number of times, and I've sat in on a number of ISSP meetings
Mhm.
with gathered professionals. And what I would regularly get was, oh, I didn't realize like you did so much or you knew so much. Like, it was always this sort of disbelief that I was able to sit down in this meeting and talk about child development at the same level as some of these other professionals. And they weren't trying to be rude. So I had to, you know, take a deep breath and just
Mhm.
explain, no, this is what I do, this is what my profession is, this is what we're
Yeah.
doing at our center, and using it as an advocacy moment so that those professionals that I was speaking to would go out then and tell their colleagues, their peer professionals, today I sat in a meeting with an ECE and they knew this much and they knew this. And I think that what is important as an ECE is being familiar enough with our content that we're going into these conversations with, so that we can maintain that professionalism. And it doesn't mean using big words, but it does mean knowing, you know, we're with children almost as much as caregivers and parents are with children. So it's good for us to reflect on what we're going to share with these professionals so that they can see the professional that we are,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense. So
Mhm.
we know that we're professionals, but sometimes if we're intimidated, if we're unsure about what to say, it can cause a bit of a fumbling. That it's not that we don't know our stuff, I'm going to say. We know our stuff.
Mhm.
It's that we need to make sure that when we're communicating with other professionals, it comes across that way. And I think that's a really important part of establishing those reciprocal professional relationships, so that
Yeah.
you can take, like an ECE can take what is being suggested by an occupational therapist, by a speech language pathologist, and put that into practice, and then come back and say, this, I use your tools and this is how it went and I have things to say about it. I think that's a really important part. It's almost like I want to word it that we stand our ground on what we know, and
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
work on that confidence to be able to say
Yeah.
that we know what we know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I only semi recently started going to like ISSP meetings and stuff because I, worked with the inclusion children, but I wasn't the inclusion staff. So
Right.
I was there for the prep for the meetings where, we all shared any like suggestions for strengths and needs and all that stuff. But only recently, the last couple of years ago, did my first one by myself. It was the most nerve-wracking thing I have ever done. But now I've also been fortunate that I've followed these two children for the last 3 years. So I got practice by being with the same team every time.
Yep.
And it's definitely a more comfort level and like, oh yes,
Yep.
I do belong here.
Yeah.
I do know my things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not suggesting that, like, someone that's a little, my first meeting, I would have been nervous too, but
Yeah.
it's about, and I know, like, in terms of how many hours we have at work in a day, we're constantly
Hmm.
with our group of children.
Yeah.
There's a lot of workplaces that don't have the luxury of planning time and all
Hmm.
those kinds of things. But if there is a luxury of planning time, some of that planning time could be reflecting on some of these things that we've mentioned. Like if you're working with a child that, or even if you're not the inclusion staff, like you
Hmm.
said, if you're in a room with a child, and I think most of us these days are, there's often a couple of children that, whether or not they have an inclusion staff, we're looking at more and more that children need support in some capacity. I think it's important to take the time to reflect. So that reflective practice piece is so important because it helps us integrate what we're doing every day with being able to have the language to communicate what we're doing every day. Because I've worked with ECEs who are phenomenal ECEs, but if you were to ask them, what did you do there with that child that worked, they would kind of be like, oh, I don't know. And it's because that person didn't really take the time, even though they were doing it and they were wonderful at it, they didn't really have a reflective practice part of their professional journey. And when I started asking this person questions, because I was like, wow, like that was so great, the ECE started self-reflecting on, oh, okay, like, well, actually, I do this with this child and this is why. So it's, they knew what they were doing. It's just that taking the time to reflect on that is an important piece. because we can learn from not only choices we made that maybe didn't go as planned, we can learn from choices we made that went well. Because I think sometimes we have a tendency to go, "Oh, that worked! Thank goodness, everything is good," and then just sort of move on to the next part of our day because we're so busy. But if we take the time to go, "Why did that work so well? I want to be able to recreate that this particular scenario another time." We can learn from that and use it again as a tool.
Yeah, for sure. And talking about reflecting as well, we can really benefit from the suggestions of those professionals we work with.
Oh, yes.
And
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
you mentioned that, and reflecting on it and bringing it back to the professional as well, because you don't want to just do something and then go on about your day, because it really helps them in their practice as well to hear this is working,
Yeah.
you
Or
know,
this is not working.
or this is not
Yeah.
working. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think just to add on there one little note, I think it's important too to always, if a professional is offering a suggestion that you don't think is going to work, you either need to have very clear, confident information to explain why you think that it may not work for the child it's being suggested for, or you need to have the open mind that, you know what, I'm going to try this because maybe it will. Because I think sometimes we can fall into the pit of thinking like, well, I know this child the best, that's not going to work. But perhaps the particular way, there's like a nuance to what the professional is suggesting, that when you
Mm-hmm.
go put it into practice, you go, oh wow, that went way better than I expected, and then you can report that back. But I do still think there's room to say, and not in, again, I led with the respect piece. So it's, you're
Mm-hmm.
not saying, no, that'll never work. It's
Hmm.
going, well, based on this information, I know X, Y, and Z about this child. So I think that the suggestion you're making, I'm a little concerned about how it's going to go. And then see what the person says back. So it's not about saying, no, I'm not going to do that because it's not going to work. It's about
Mm-hmm.
saying, here's my thoughts based on my professional knowledge of this child. And that's a totally different feeling
Yeah.
than, no, that's not going to work, which just shuts down the conversation and can
Yeah.
often shut off the professional relationship.
Yeah. I know, like, suggestions, they're not criticisms. They're
No.
meant to
No.
support us.
Yeah.
And it is, like you said, really important to be willing to have that open mind and be willing to brainstorm, with solutions, because they're not saying you have to do this. You're just
No.
saying, they're usually saying, have you tried this, or can we
Yeah.
try this?
Yeah.
Right
Yeah.
there. It's not a be all end all.
No. No. And they're only going, they're basing what they're suggesting off of a small
Mm.
amount of information, whereas you have the information as an ECE of every minute of that child every day. But they're also basing it off of having additional knowledge from a educational background
Mm-hmm.
of
Yeah.
things that might work. So sometimes it's that there's little cues and little details that you've shared about the child that leads the professional to have the assumption that X, Y, or Z will
Mm-hmm.
work. And so they make that suggestion based off of that. And there could be cases where you might not think it's going to work, and then you try it out and it does. So
Yeah.
having that open mind is so important. And then aside from having the open mind, um, professional practice also means knowing how to repair when
Yeah.
things didn't go the way you wanted it to go.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I highly encourage that with children, like as an ECE with a child, just as much as with a colleague or with
Mm-hmm.
another professional that comes into our spaces. I think it's important to own that a mistake or a decision wasn't the best fit, and
Mm-hmm.
circle back and reconnect, so that with children, it's teaching children that you can admit fault
Yeah.
and the relationship is still good. You can
Yeah.
admit fault and no one's in trouble. So I would do that with children. but I would also do it with my colleagues, and I would often do it in front of the children because then you're modeling it.
Yeah.
It would have to be appropriate topics, but I would say out loud, Sonia, you know what? I said that there was only a blue cup left, but there's actually a red cup, and you had wanted a red cup. And that might be sort of silly,
Mm-hmm.
but children hearing that, even though it might have actually been, I might have said to you privately, like, you might have said, oh, we need an extra blue cup for the cup races. I don't know, some game we're playing. And I'm like, no, 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 there's only a red cup left. And then I go check, and I'm there coming back saying out loud so the children can hear, I've made a mistake. I'm letting you know I've made a mistake. And here I'm repairing. And this is how we maintain our positive relationship and no one's in trouble. So, doing that repair benefits the children, it
Mm-hmm.
benefits the relationship with your colleague. And the same thing, if you had that conversation that I suggested with a professional where you say, you know what, here's why I think that's going to be tricky with this child, or here's why I'm concerned about using this strategy with this child, it would be then important to go back and say, you know what, that worked perfectly. The child really was engaged, and whatever else you want to say.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
But taking the time to I'm going to say, loosely call it admitting fault, is a really important part of professional practice that I think sometimes as ECEs we have been put in a place as professionals that we have to constantly defend ourselves. We're constantly defending the choices we make with children when it comes to regulations. We're constantly defending the fact that we're professionals and not just babysitters. I feel like we're constantly on our toes defending things.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
But I think it's important to take the time when appropriate to do those repairs, because um, it benefits the relationship building.
I kind
Yeah.
of see like a lot of what you're talking about is going in my mind as like kind of like a balancing act between confidence and humility.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a really great way to look at it, because if you're overconfident, you're not making your relationships aren't going to
No.
be positively be impacted. But if you are leaning too much into the humility side of it, it might be that you're doing really great things, but you're not, people don't know that you're doing the great things.
Mhm.
And I think as much as we can want to be defensive of our profession, I think we need to strategically be advocates for what we do as well. And that works better from a professional perspective. So, letting people know, I tell anyone that wants to hear, I jokingly talk about getting my soapbox out, which is such an old reference, but I get my soapbox out any chance I get. Family, friends. I used to work in the service industry in restaurants. I would have tables, and I'd be like, let me tell you what an ECE does. Not quite like that, but in any opportunity I could have, I would, sing it from the hilltops in a professional way. Here's what an ECE does, and here's why an ECE is such an important part of society. It's not just part of a child's life. It's an integral part of um, of building up society, because we're raising future humans and we're also allowing current adults to be able to work. So we play such a large role that I think gets undermined or misunderstood. Even I know there's lots of parents that might appreciate that we exist, but they still don't really know what we're doing. So that's an
Mm-hmm.
interesting kind of balancing act too.
Yeah. I didn't think about that, but yeah.
So another thing when it comes to being on my soapbox is the fact that a lot of people really don't understand how much of our workday is observing what's going on for children. I
Yeah.
have actually jokingly said that we're like little doctors, or like, picture this. If you're a family doctor, someone comes into your office, and with a very limited amount of information, you have to diagnose any possible thing that this person has. Now, let's picture a 4-year-old walking into a room, and you have to I'm not going to use the word diagnose because it's not about diagnostics, but you have to assess all the different pieces of this 4-year old and um, be able to help support learning just from what you're observing, because a lot of children are still learning language, they're still learning how to express themselves. And I think as ECEs we take a lot of time to get to know children so that we can adjust ourselves to be able to meet children where they are. So I can be very boisterous and excited with a child that is very excitable
Mm-hmm.
and wants that high
Mm-hmm.
energy. And that works really well for that child. But if there's another child that's very reserved, I have to meet that child where they are. I can't use that same excitability with a child that's reserved because it's not going to land the same way.
No.
So, as ECEs, we have to look at each individual child and make a judgment call on how to best support their learning. And the first piece of supporting their learning is building trust with the child.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is and that comes from both educators. And sometimes, you know, to bring it back to the reflective practice, we have to be aware of what our strengths are as well. So if I know that I'm not really great with reserved children, I might let my colleague take the lead with certain children as in sort of a primary caregiver kind of way. It's not that I'm not
Right.
building a relationship
Mm-hmm.
with that child, but especially when the child, if it's a reserved child starting new in the space, I might see right away, oh, I'm going to let Taylor take this child under
Mm-hmm.
her wing to get
Mm-hmm.
her assimilated into the room because I'm just going to be too over the top for her or him.
Yeah.
And so knowing where our strengths are and our temperament and where that's going to align to support children's learning, because if a reserved child is met with an off the wall, happy, well, you can be reserved and happy, but an off the
Yeah.
wall, sort of excitable ECE, that can actually mean that that child goes more into their shell like a little turtle,
Yeah. It
and
can be
they're not going
intimidating.
to have the same play. They're not going to have the same learning because they're going to be
Right.
in that more fearful space.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas
Mm-hmm.
you're able to meet that child where they are, assess their temperament, assess what their interests are, you can slowly help that child, grow into the room. And I've actually seen children that have been very reserved when they start end up being some of the most excitable, boisterous children once they've acclimatized
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
space. So making sure that we as ECEs meet the child where they are is such an important part of making sure that when that child separates from their family member, they feel safe and they feel comfortable and they feel like it might be, I'm not saying every child is going to want to be in our spaces right from the first
Mm-hmm.
minute, but we want to provide them with that feeling of safety so that over time that trust is built, because without trust you can't learn. If you're not feeling secure in a space, you can't focus long enough to play and learn. So as ECEs, it's important for us to know our own temperament so that we can adapt, adjust, or even lean on another ECE's strengths to
Yeah.
support the children in the space.
And that leaning on our partner's strengths, it helps show respect, but also valuing them,
Oh yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Like if we're upfront and truthful about our intentions, where they're going to feel valued. And
absolutely.
if they
Mm-hmm.
feel valued, they're going to be more effective and efficient in their job, and all the relationships are going to benefit from that.
Yeah.
Small consistent actions
Hmm.
matter more than grand gestures. So earlier we talked about just letting a family member know that your colleague had this really great interaction with their child, and it could be something like I would lean a lot of my sharing into something very advocacy based, like meaning I want the caregiver to know we know child development. Like maybe it's that a child was really working on fine motor difficulty with zipper, something like that, and I might say, "Oh, today, or your child has been playing with Play-Doh. We've been putting this out. We've been putting that out. They've been really working on their fine motor. And today, Sonia encouraged your child to just pull the zipper up on their own, and they finally got it, and they were so proud. And Sonia walked her through it. I mean, that's a very small example, but
Mhm.
it's those little small gestures that can kind of shift the whole tone of a day, and it
Yeah.
shows your appreciation for your colleague, so you can be doing it back and forth, and eventually it's a habit that's built that it just comes naturally.
Mhm.
Hmm.
I think we've really talked a lot about all the professionals that we deal with and the families, the children.
Yes. Yeah.
And all I throughout this whole conversation I've really seen a connection between all those relationships.
Yes. Yeah.
The If the trust gets broken in one relationship, it affects the rest.
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe not directly, but indirectly,
Yeah.
because actions or behaviors change and everything just snowballs, like you said
Yes.
earlier.
Yeah.
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 And another thing to keep in mind too is that when stress is high, the risk for misinterpretation is also high.
Yes.
So I already sort of mentioned that if you lean on on being respectful, even if in the moment you feel that someone is being their tone is flat or rude or whatever, if you offer that person respect on your end, it might be that the next time that person comes to you, they either are being respectful back. If they're confident enough, they might do a repair. Because one thing I should have added about the repair is that repairing takes confidence. It takes a lot
Yeah.
to say to
Mm.
someone, "I made a mistake and I'm
Yeah.
sorry." It's really hard to do that. It's funny because we make children do it all the time, or not. We don't make it, but it's more common for adults to encourage children to do this repair when it's hard on adults.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
sometimes it's about if you felt that someone wasn't being respectful, but then the next time they're being respectful, that could be the repair in itself. Depending, I'm not saying that anyone should deal with disrespect on a regular basis, but I just mean that sometimes it's just maybe my mind is what's going on at home. So my tone is coming out a little too harsh, but I don't even realize I'm doing it. That's what I mean. I don't mean dealing with disrespect on a regular
Hmm.
basis.
Hmm.
And knowing that if we take that positive lead, it usually, not every time, it usually leads to more and more positive interactions. And if that's not the case, because I know that sometimes things can go negative and it's hard to get back to the positive. And in response to that, I would say that I would remind people that asking for help is professional.
Yeah.
Yep.
So whether it's navigating something with a child, so you go to your colleague and say, I'm really stuck. I'm not really sure what to be doing. It could be conflict with a colleague. So you could seek support from a supervisor, from a director, or from another colleague that maybe knows the colleague you're having conflict with a bit better. But if you ask for help, that's not showing weakness. It's actually showing strength, and it's showing professionalism.
Yeah, definitely. And that's another side of the humility as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm stuck on that balancing act now with the
Yeah.
confidence and
Yeah.
humility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I really like that. I think that's one of the big things I've taken from this conversation. And just the relationships all connected.
Yeah.
I
They all build on
it's
each other.
Yeah, they do. But yeah, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much
Yes.
for joining us, Hillary.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for having me. Bye.
So the main theme that I gathered from that conversation with Hillary was that professional practice is all about respect and relationships.
Hmm.
having positive relationships, and how much all of those relationships are interconnected and affect each other.
Yeah.
We talked about, if we're not showing respect for our coworkers, the children will notice that. And then bias will come into play.
Mhm.
And then our relationships with the children are going to be affected. And if our relationships with the children are affected, their relationships with each other are going to be affected. The behaviors are going to be affected.
Mhm.
And if the behaviors are affected, that's going to roll into the relationships with their families.
Anyways.
And it's going to affect our relationships with the outside professionals that we work with, because we're going to
Yeah.
be reaching out more for support because of all those behaviors that are happening, because we don't respect each other.
Yep.
And it's not just that piece of, me respecting you as a coworker. Any relationship that is strained, that is lacking that respect, is going to affect the others. And that's going
Mhm.
to affect our practice. That's going to affect our ability to properly do our job, to support all those relationships.
Yeah.
And one thing that I know near the end, or just shortly after the middle, she was talking about how important it is for us to speak with confidence.
Yes.
And then if we disagree with something, but being open-minded and willing to try it, and then acknowledging to the professional that, you know, that actually worked. That was great. And that humility balanced with confidence. How
Yeah.
important that is. All those aspects just all rolled in together.
Yeah, like, well, they all affect each other.
Mhm.
Um, which that kind of ties into what stuck out to me during our conversation with Hillary, because um, at the time of this recording, I am working with a child who has a very large team. And so there are a decent amount of professionals that come in and observe and work with the child. And as well as other professionals for other children and such. And something that a specific part that she talked about that really stood out to me was that if they're suggesting or offering ideas that we feel isn't going to work, is, being very clear and having confident information as to why it wouldn't work,
Mhm.
having an open mind. Because I think it's important to remember that, like for the example of this child, he has a large team. People see him regularly, but they're still only seeing this, like the children, like what, once a month max, typically.
Mhm.
Um, and so when they give us ideas, it's not because they think we couldn't come up with these ourselves, but it's a brainstorming session.
Yeah. It's
And
that
they're
collaborative
just,
piece.
yeah. And so I think it's really important to remember that if they're suggesting things that don't work, or that you feel isn't going to work, or you have tried and it hasn't worked, rather than be defensive, just explain.
Yeah.
Just say, I see where I see where you're coming from and why that would seem like it would work. But here is what we have tried, and this is why it didn't work. And but the other side of that too is maybe they are suggesting something that's very similar to what you have already tried, but there's like one piece that's different.
Yeah, just a little tweak.
Just that little tweak that's different.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to keep that open mind with that, because that little difference could be the difference of it working or not
Hmm.
working.
Yeah. And that's why we have those community partners.
Yes, having those respectful conversations, and like I said, rather than getting defensive and that's not going to work. Like she said, if you're going to disagree with them or say
Mhm.
it's not going to work, you've got to have clear information and be confident in the information as to
Yeah.
why, so that they have an understanding as to why you feel it's not going to work, and not just, no, I don't want to try it.
Yeah.
Because that's what it can look like if you're just like, no, it's not going to work. Blanket statement. And
Yep.
nobody learns from that.
Oh,
Like, you're not giving them information about the child that could be helpful in them coming up with a different idea. But yeah, no one wins if you are closed-minded and just really not working on those interconnected relationships.
and we're
It,
advocating for the
we're
child.
advocating for the child and for ourselves as well,
Hmm.
that we are professionals in this industry as well.
Yeah. And next month, we're switching gears a little bit. We're going into goal 3 of the framework, play and exploration. And just reflecting on that and thinking about, it seems so different from this topic, but really, you think of the interconnected relationships. There's interconnected relationships
Mm-hmm.
amongst all the work that we do,
Mm-hmm.
all the aspects of our work. And if we don't have those respectful relationships, that comfortable, safe atmosphere and environment for the children, their play and exploration is going to be affected as well. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, really looking forward to that topic, and definitely seeing all the little nuances of all the aspects of our jobs working together.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I think it's going to be very informative, and I'm excited to see what people have to say and to learn, because I there's definitely more that I can learn in those topics.
Yeah.
Anyways, well, everyone, thanks for watching, and we hope to see you next month. Bye.
Bye.